Welcome to Athletes OnBalance, where we talk to athletes, coaches, and experts about mental health and sports. This is a stigma-free zone for inner thoughts and outer conversations. We're helping athletes and anyone with mental health challenges perform at their best, on and off the field.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Athletes on Balance. I'm your host, Walton Early, founder and CEO of On Balance Health. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Meiko Locksley, head football coach at the University of Maryland. Coach Locksley has been coaching for more than 30 years, including 8 seasons as a full-time head coach. His coaching resume includes positions at major programs like the University of Alabama, University of Florida, University of Illinois, and of course, Maryland. His first head coaching stint was at the University of New Mexico from 2009 to 2011. During the 2017 season, Coach Locksley won a national championship while serving on Coach Nick Saban's staff at Alabama. In 2018, Coach Locksley was hired as the 37th head football coach for the Terps, making his third coaching stint with Maryland. He spent more than 15 years in different coaching roles for the Terps. That's amazing. Beginning in 2021, Coach Locksley has led Maryland to 3 consecutive winning seasons, each of those ending with bowl game victories. Congratulations. Beyond his success on the football field, Coach Locksley is a passionate advocate for mental health for athletes, which is our focus on this show. I've spoken extensively about my own mental health journey, which you can check out in prior episodes, and I'm very excited to dig in with Coach as we think about mental health management and the education for student athletes. Coach, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me on.
Before you began your coaching career, you were a student athlete at Towson in Maryland, playing both football and basketball. What was your perspective and knowledge level on mental health at that stage of your life?
I can tell you I had very little knowledge of what mental health was. You know, I grew up in one of these communities, obviously a predominantly Black community, the South Side of Washington, D.C. I grew up in the Southwest section and then eventually moved over to the Southeast side for high school. And I can tell you the closest thing that I heard in terms of relationships with mental health is, your auntie is having a nervous breakdown. Everybody, when people talked about what I now know as mental health issues, they were always masked in my home or in my community as the mental or nervous breakdowns and not feeling well, but almost was a taboo thing to talk about or even say. I never knew what it was until I dealt with an uncle who came back from the war and was not the same.
Not surprised. I mean, I obviously not from the same community in terms of color, but in my day, it wasn't talked about as well. I'm, not to diminish what either one of us might have gone through and didn't recognize it, and when we played, but the student athletes today have just so much more on their plate than yesteryear with social media and NIL now and the transfer portal. I mean, so, what, as a head coach of a major college program, Big Ten, how do you manage this? How do you, knowing what you know now, how do you manage this with your players, in this modern day society?
Yeah, I've always looked at being a coach as no different than being a parent. And, each individual kid, as I always say to our staff, is you have to meet them where they are. We have a tendency as adults to maybe not always meet the child or the kid or the student athlete where they are because of these expectations we have. And I think the first step into getting them to where you want them to go is to kind of meet them where they are on the common ground, and then just explain or teach the importance of why it's important to do things or have certain things in place. And so, there's no doubt that this generation is a little different. As you said, they are being judged in everything they do, from social media to how they dress to how they talk to likes and dislikes, and every single thing that they do, say, or are part of is being judged. And because of it, we all understand the negative self-talk and how it leads you down a rabbit hole I just thought as I've evolved as a coach that it's really important to get a personal relationship with each player, to meet them where they are, and then to find out and partner with them in terms of how do I help them be the best version of themselves. And we talk about it academically, athletically, and socially. And that's where, from a social standpoint, as well as the other two areas, to be your best in those three areas, you got to be on the top of your game from a mental standpoint. And it's, to me, the secret sauce of being able to have success is making sure that the players and the people involved in your program are at their best whenever they're doing certain things.
Yeah, I'm curious because, frankly, I deal with this in my business world as well. Um, again, with this generation and a whole different mentality, how do you manage that line between you want to take care of them, you want to educate them, you want to you want to be present for them if they're going through a struggle. However, that line of you got to push through.
Yes.
We're all about, sometimes we don't want to go out there and do all the things that we need to do. How do you straddle that line?
Well, the big thing is I still think it takes a village to raise these children and these young men that we're fortunate to bring into our program, and that's where the utilization of the mental health providers that we've hired here. When I first got here, we had one mental health provider for our whole athletic department, and they had some part-time people that would come in. And I can tell you now we've got 3 full-time people that work just with football on the mental health side. And as I found, like myself, a first generation college graduate, the first of my family to finish college, immediate family, a lot of these kids that we recruit and bring here have a lot of luggage that has never been unpacked. And I I know how I felt leaving the environment I grew up in and going to predominantly white institutions, colleges where I never really shared a classroom with somebody in a different race until I got to college. So just imagine the being thrown into an uncomfortable environment, and it's the same way on the other side of it. It's not always about race. It could be socioeconomic,
Right.
gender, it could be whatever it is, but just being taken out of an environment that's been so comfortable for you and then put into another one, that in itself is a challenge. And so recognizing how I felt, and because I've went through some of these changes and challenges as I entered college at Towson State in 1987, I remembered those feelings, and I started thinking to myself after dealing with a son that had mental health issues. I saw signs in other kids I coached, and it, after diving into it because of dealing with it as a parent, I became much more conscientious to the mental approach of making sure that these kids I bring in, that even when they don't know what they don't know. And so
Right.
we do mental health screening when they first come in. That's
Right.
one of the things we added, where we do a mental health screening with our mental health providers, and we do some testing, and we talk about, have they ever done used therapy? Have they ever experienced it? So asking the right questions, but then the other side of it is, as you say, pushing them to not being stuck. Again, we use it as a resource and a tool to get better, just like we do the weight room, just like we do nutrition. This is another way to be the best at your game. But we also teach the accountability of, you're going to have bad days, but
Right.
we still have to figure out how to use the resources we have while also pushing through and showing resiliency. And to me, that's important. And that's the balance of a coach as a parent, being aware and conscientious enough to know who, when, what you can push guys, how many, what guys can be pushed, what guys you need to back off, and then what guys do you just let the medical protocol take its place. And I usually err on the side of the medical protocol of dealing with kids that are going through things mentally.
Curiosity. So you have essentially you do a baseline test when they come in. Do you have any sense when you're recruiting, or because they haven't gone through all this transitional elements that you mentioned, right? With the competition, the new environment, the new exposure, the classroom at a bigger level and all that. Is it hard to detect that when you're recruiting the athlete?
It is, because as you know, when you're getting recruited by major Division I institutions like Maryland, it's a feel good thing. And so, as we say, winning and success deodorizes maybe some of the things that are going on in your life, or deodorizes maybe some things that are not very successful.
Right.
And so when you go to recruit kids, usually you see them at their best and you
Right.
see them put on their best, but it's when the recruiting goes off, the lights turn off, they signed, and then reality of the business side of it sets in. There's fear, there's doubt, there's negative self-talk, as we know. And it's our job to kind of provide resources that allow them to be the best version of themselves, mentally and physically. And so we get to work on that right away.
Well, I got a question for you. We said up front that I've been fortunate to know Coach Nick Saban, since I was 18 years old, and he's been an inspiration for me in a couple ways. And as I said, he was a guest on this podcast. You spent 3 seasons with him. Anything in particular, Coach, that you pulled away from the standpoint of, and then you apply today from his perspective on taking care of the well-being of the players and the athletes?
Yeah, I can tell you, I often refer to it as grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe. When you go to Alabama as a coach, I know for me it was I'd been a head coach already, a fired head coach. I'd been a successful coordinator, and I wanted to know how and why they were able to have the type of success they've had consistently. And I will be the first to tell you that I would not have known or understood the impact of having a plan for the mental health of your players and team if I hadn't spent the 3 years at Alabama. Because I can tell you, when I was at other places, and you've talked about some of the places I've been, I mean, we talk mental health. We'd have a mental health provider on campus, and you could use the student services. But it wasn't until I got to Bama where I saw full in-house resources. Ginger Gilmore
Right,
and Jeff Allen, who's the head trainer, and
right.
bringing in Dr. Lonnie, who did a lot of the testing on the front end, and a lot of those things that were set up in place and the protocols that were put into place that I learned at Bama or what I kind of implemented here on a scale that we could afford and provide. And it's been one of the best things we do, because I think our players and the people involved in our program have really benefited from having these types of resources. And, being at Alabama and going, I spent 27 years never getting a crack at a national championship. And then I go to Alabama and we go to 3 straight national championships. And so when you see that consistency, you look at all the different things we do, and I can tell you that the mental health protocols and the mental health programming that we had in place there are some of the same structures, things we do in place here. And they played a major role in the success, I think, and why Alabama has had success, and why we're having success here at Maryland on another level.
So you mentioned grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, and I guess what you're referring to is elements of the recipe that create the outcome. Yeah, that's a good analogy. You've you've coached countless players at all these great schools, and have had obviously a very impressive career. Um, on a high level view, if you kind of had a genie wish list and you could make something happen to improve how student athletes, I mean, you just explained it, you have a very impressive program, and you took that recipe from a program that had a lot of success. But is there anything still out there that, if you had that wish list, that you might apply?
I can tell you, I mean, the key to this all is, one, removing the stigma that it's a negative. I mean, growing up and the way I grew up, and knowing the community in which I grew up, it has a stigma associated with it as far as not being strong. But I actually, having seen the battle that my son Meiko fought through his mental health struggles, it actually showed me just how strong it is to recognize it, as well as to have to endure. It's amazing that when you hurt your arm, you break an arm, you put a cast on it, everybody knows you're hurt, and you get sympathy, you get help. People see you carrying things, and let me help you. You hurt your ankle the same way. You're on a scooter, you're on a crutches, people help you. They open doors. Well, I saw the way Meiko was treated when he dealt with some of the mental health issues, and it's, to remove the stigma to it, to know that it is actually a disease, and it's no different than any other injury you have. I just don't think the sympathy is there. So if I could change one thing, I would probably do a better job of being an advocate for the resources. You look at the way I was very fortunate financially to be able to, as Meiko went through his struggles with mental health, I had the ability financially to take care of and try to get him the best help I could get him. But I also met a lot of dead end doors and saw a lot of things that, your insurance providers don't pay for. It's an expensive injury. And I think it's one that needs to be taken basically in the same light. You see all the things going on now with the opioid crisis. Well, mental health is in one of those type crises, and things like doing this podcast, which is why I did it, is to bring more awareness that there are ways and cures and things that we can do, and we just have to continue to shine the light on it while also embracing that this stigma that it is a disease that needs the attention, and it's an expensive one if you don't have the resources provided through health insurance. It's one that our country and our government and our local what is our federal governments, we need to do a better job of taking care of the people that are struggling with these things.
Yeah, it's really well said, and I agree with every element. I mean, we've got two different lines going on here. You're talking about the general public, and I happen to know quite a bit about it. I mean, at the end of the day, the insurance companies don't reimburse at the same level, as they do for the physical injuries, which, hurts the provider, world, in terms of dollars and cents. And they're forced to kind of go outside that and do it outside insurance. And a lot of people can't afford that, as you just said. You're fortunate within what you said about, I want to talk about Meiko, but you're fortunate within your world, your ecosystem with a major college program, and I've seen it at others, where you provide those resources, right? And that's a fortunate thing for your student athletes. If you're comfortable, Coach, talking about Meiko a little bit further, can you kind of share what happened? And within that, were there any early signs or behavior changes that you perhaps could have seen something coming?
After hindsight is always 2020, and having talked to my family, I mean, there were definitely signs earlier in his youth when he was growing up, that after the fact, because I had no idea what mental health was, other than I knew I had an uncle that, as we used to say, was tripping, like something like he would talk to himself, wouldn't come out the room.
Right.
And we just never really talked about what's going on with Uncle Barrett. We just kind of,
Right.
never discussed it. Well, I can tell you that with Meiko, he was a normal 21-year-old college football player. Was a pretty good football player, recruited out of high school pretty heavily, and then he finished his career, playing at Towson, my alma mater, but he played for me at New Mexico. And it was right after I got let go at New Mexico. And obviously, when you're a coach's kid, your last name's Locksley, your dad just got fired, you have to deal with those things. And that's one of the things that, as a coach, people don't understand that we do have families, and we do, when dad fails, it's a reflection on everybody. And that's not necessarily fair to the kids. And, I can tell you, Meiko struggled with that transition from Towson, from New Mexico to Lackawanna to Towson, where he had his last game. But, one of the breaking points was he had gotten into a big bar fight up in Towson in college, and it got arrested, put in prison, and put in jail for the weekend. And I kind of left him in there, and that type of behavior was not normal for Meiko. He was usually a pretty mature decision maker, but that side of him, and then talking to his girlfriend at the time, she said that he had just been acting strange and was almost very paranoid about, things happening and hearing things and thinking things that just didn't make sense. And I can remember, he's at Towson, I'm here at Maryland coaching. And I remember my wife and I, after his girlfriend had kind of called us and said, look, I don't know what's going on, but something's not right with Meiko. And we drive up to his apartment, and he's got all this, black curtains over everything. He's pulled off the electric sockets off of the sockets off the thing and covered them up with tape. He kept saying that people were watching them, and all the signs of paranoia that typically comes with the mental health crisis. And then he started struggling, went through some where he couldn't tell the difference between reality and myth, and it just blew my mind, because it was almost like a month ago he's a Division I football player playing on TV against West Virginia, and the next month I'm dealing with a kid that's can't differentiate between fact and myth. And it just, for me, that just blows my mind. But I also saw a look on his face, and it's this deadpan stare where you can almost see through his eyes to his soul. And seeing that look reminded me of other players that I had coached over the 25 years I'd been in it at that time. And I can remember seeing faces of some of my players, like, that I've dealt with, and I won't name names, and I didn't recognize that look at that time. But now, after seeing my son and understanding kind of what he's going through, and, as a family, we had to call and do the medical paperwork to get him taken to be evaluated, which is a whole process in itself. We learned very quickly the trials and tribulations of mental health, and trying to provide some resources for people that are struggling at that time. It's almost as if prison is the place they put people dealing with mental health, instead of
Right.
hospitals where they actually can get help or figure out what's going on. And we dealt with that with Meiko, having him getting in and out of trouble. He went from trying to run away from home because he knew at our house that there were certain standards he had to live by. And, in an effort to quiet the voices in his head, he would use alcohol, he would use marijuana, and it doesn't fit with what we're all about as a family. And so he decided he wanted to be homeless. So he went and lived in a homeless shelter, and I had to check him or trick him into coming back home. And just, so we did, again, as a family, we reached out to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illnesses, and we started doing, my wife and I went to group parental group therapies there to learn and to hear about all the other the maybe things that can help us. We tried everything. We took them to different doctors. We had brain scans. We put them on different, medications, and everything we could to try to provide an outlet for him. And, it just continued to deteriorate to where, he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is kind of a mixture of schizophrenia and depression, as well as bipolar disorder. So
he's cycling a lot.
Recycling. And I could just remember as parents feeling helpless, because you look at your child and you see that look, and it was almost like he was trapped in his own brain. Like, there were times where I would look at him, and it was almost like I could feel him asking me, "Pops, help me." And it was the hardest thing I had to go through as a parent, is not being able to help my son. So hence the reason this mental health thing is a real thing for me. It's not just something I do because, from a recruiting standpoint, and I do it because I understand it, and having lived through it as a caretaker of someone that dealt with these issues.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm very sorry for your loss, and your wife and your family. And as a dad myself, it's kind of, I can't imagine it. So my condolences on them. But I want to ask you, how have you coped with it? On your own. Obviously you're doing you're doing a great job coaching, recruiting. You got all these other things you're dealing with in modern football, with NIL transfer and all that stuff. And how has it affected you from the standpoint of a husband, a father, and a coach? A coach, I think you've shared, but how about as a person?
Yeah, I think I could definitely do better practicing what I preach because a lot of things, my natural reaction is to fix it myself. As a kid, it was kind of me to myself. I had to become the man of the house pretty early at an early age. I had my first son when I was 18 years old. So I've always kind of had to be the man of the house, and it was important, right now for me to practice what I preach. And I think what I try to do, in almost a way of honoring Meiko so that he didn't, die in vain at his death, was that the things that I knew I needed to do for him as far as providing him with these resources, I have no problem talking about his story because his story may help someone else. I share with my players all the time, but I pour into the players in my program outside of just the football piece. I want them to leave here well-rounded. I want them to leave here understanding that, from a mental health standpoint, to be their best, to others, they have to be their own very best. And, it's something we talk about a lot, to the point that we're constantly being proactive instead of waiting for something to happen and being reactive. And so, Dr. Christy Hall runs our mental health program. Dr. Yvette Rooks is our team physician. Um, you know, they have provided our head trainer, have all provided these resources, and our players, I feel, are really, really, really well resourced when it comes to understanding that we'll leave no dollar unspent in terms of giving them the things they need to be the best version of themselves.
The part of your healing and coping and moving forward is to create this awareness, to provide the education, and to provide the resources, and
True.
walk the talk, if you will, right? Um,
Yep.
kind of threading off that. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but I do like to talk to guests on this about because it's sports, it's just sports, and I think it's a life too. But the word mentally tough, mental toughness, right? It's been a word that you and I heard all the time, and I actually personally I take pride in it, to be able to push through. But modern day, what does that word mean to you? Those two words, mental tough. What do they mean?
So mental is thinking. I mean, are you thinking the right way? Like, are you in a space that allows you to think? And then toughness, when I put those two words together, is how much does it take to break you? And when you reach that breaking point, how you respond to it. Not necessarily how you fight through it, it's how you respond. And, to me, mental toughness is it's the difference in championship mindset, being able to persevere, fight through even when you're not at your best, but also understanding that to be your best, I'd rather you be proactive. I always talk about being a pro before you're a pro. So let's not wait until something happens that a mental health breakthrough happens before we try to fix it. Let's be proactive and talk about it on the front end. One of the things we do here at Maryland, in an effort to allow people to have free conversation, we do what's called the 3 H's for all new players and new coaches in our program. And basically you have to say what's been the thing that has made you the happiest in your life, what has been the hardest thing you've had to go through, and then what is the thing you most love to honor. Who do you honor? And when you have players get up and talk about overcoming, what's the hardest thing, what's the happiest thing, who do you honor, who's your why, you learn a lot. And I think that's kind of the breakthrough to allowing people to communicate, because if you can communicate within the family about things that aren't going well, to me, that's the environment necessary to thrive. From a mental toughness, you look at us going through a 4-game losing streak a year ago, and a lot of places, a 4-game losing streak breaks the mental toughness of your team. And I saw us kind of come together and band together to win the last 2 games that got us the bowl eligibility and then winning the bowl game. So I do think some of the work we do with our players from a mental health standpoint isn't always just reactive. Some of it is proactive, and I think it benefits us as a program.
That's creative. You know, 3 H's. I actually, and I've not heard that. I love that. Uh, I asked this last question to all our guests, and that is, I'm really, I find it very interesting to hear some of the answers, and that is, you know, who in your life journey has been most inspirational?
Mm. Who in I mean, it had to be my mom, you know, Vanita Locksley. She passed away in May after I got the Maryland job. I got hired December 8th, 2018. And, you know, May 2019, she passed away. And single parent, raised 4 kids on her own, worked her tail off, gave tremendous effort in terms of providing. And as I've always said, you know, nothing has ever been given to me as a coach. I've either had to earn it or take it. And that mentality of being able to, you know, failure is a great lesson. You know, I always say failure isn't final. You know, I got fired at New Mexico after 2 years and 4 games, and I turn around and 10 years later, I'm coaching my dream job, the University of Maryland, which doesn't normally happen for people like myself. To get recycled or get a second opportunity. And I think a lot of it goes back to the perseverance and the resiliency my mom displayed on a daily basis. And it wasn't a lot of talk. It didn't happen because she explained what was happening. I just watched a lady get up and figure life out every single day, not having a lot of resources, but having the ingenuity on how to take the resources she had and provide us, which allowed me to be kind of my first in my family to go to college. You know, I had 2 older brothers that spent most of their adult life in federal prisons, and I was the youngest. And so, you know, I almost learned what not to do, but I also saw my mom really, you know, every day work. She worked life. Like, you know, life be life, and as we like to say, and she learned how to work life, and she made the best out of whatever situation she was given. And to me, I think that's what defines me, is that I'm gonna make the best out of whatever situation I'm given. I lose a son to murder, and instead of, you know, being stuck in my stuff, I talk about it, and I use that pain to maybe help the next generation of Meiko Locksleys coming through that play Division I football by providing and being an advocate for one of the things that may have played a part or may have played a role in his death.
So, with a lot of things that you didn't have advantage with, you had a mother that you admired and instilled a lot of values and character and work ethic and perseverance, and that's special. Very fortunate to have that in your parenting with your mom.
Yep.
I want to say this. I want to say thank you very much. It's, you know, I've been fortunate to have some really interesting people on this, but you know, you know, personally, I've enjoyed this. I mean, you've gone through a lot, and you've gotten to a place that, you know the percentage game of how many people are coaching at the level you are, you know, in the program that you are, and in the conference that you are, and so, and to share this, and what you're doing for advocacy, you know, both internally and externally, that's what this is all about. You know, this is why this is why I'm doing this. This kind of conversation is what we're trying to achieve. So, thank you so much for sharing in this.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the work you guys are doing in this space and making it better.
Well, finally, I'd like to thank our listening audience and our watching audience. You know, please stay tuned for this episode and more episodes to come. Together, let's end the stigma and continue these conversations. Be well. I'm Walt Norley, and this is Athletes on Balance.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Athletes on Balance. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please follow us on your preferred podcast app to catch our next episode. Join our community by sharing with an athlete, mental health care provider, or coach in your circle.